I was standing in my cornfield when I saw the white sedan pull up my dirt driveway, kicking up dust that hung in the August heat like a dirty curtain. My grandfather had planted these same acres back in 1892, and my father after him, and now me at 86 years old. I still worked this land every single day. The woman who stepped out of that car wore heels too high for farmland and carried a clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. "Are you Leonard Calloway?" she called out, picking her way across the dirt like she was walking through a minefield. "That's what my birth certificate says," I replied, wiping the sweat from my forehead with my bandana. The corn was coming in good this year, tall and green, reaching toward the Carolina sky. She stopped about 10 feet from me, close enough to talk but far enough that she wouldn't get her fancy shoes dirty. "My name is Patricia Henderson, and I'm the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. We need to discuss some serious violations." I looked around my property, all 200 acres of it, stretching out in every direction. Homeowners Association. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. This is Calloway Farm. Has been since before your grandparents were born, most likely." Patricia pulled a sheet of paper from her clipboard with the kind of flourish that told me she'd been practicing this moment. "As of March 1st this year, your property now falls within the boundaries of Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community. That means you're subject to our rules and regulations." Planned community. I felt my jaw tighten. This is farmland, been farmland for over 130 years. "Not anymore," she said, her voice going sharp. "The land surrounding your property was purchased and developed. The HOA boundaries were legally extended to include all properties within a specific geographical area. That includes yours." I leaned on my hoe, studying this woman who thought she could come onto my land and tell me what to do. "And what exactly are these violations you're talking about?" She consulted her clipboard like a prosecutor reading charges. "The list is extensive. You have multiple outbuildings that don't conform to community aesthetic standards. Your fence is the wrong color. You're operating a commercial farming operation in a residential zone. You have farm equipment visible from the road. Your property lacks proper landscaping according to HOA guidelines. And most seriously, you have livestock, which is absolutely forbidden." "Livestock?" I almost laughed. "You mean my chickens? I got 20 chickens. They've been here longer than you've been alive." "Chickens are prohibited," Patricia said, like she was explaining something to a child. "No farm animals of any kind are allowed within Meadowbrook Heights." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Listen here, Miss Henderson. I don't know who told you that you have any say over my property, but they were wrong. This land has been in my family for generations. I've got the deed locked up in my safe, signed and legal. No HOA, no community association, nobody tells me what I can or cannot do on Calloway land." Her expression hardened. "Mr. Calloway, I'm trying to be reasonable here. You've accumulated over $40,000 in fines over the past 5 months. If you don't come into compliance immediately and pay these fines, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property." $40,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. For what? Living on my own land. "For violations that have been documented and photographed every single week since March," she said, pulling out more papers. "We've sent you multiple notices." "I never got any notices," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I remembered the official-looking envelopes I'd been tossing in the recycling bin. I got so much junk mail these days, I barely looked at half of it. "Ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse you from following them," Patricia said. "I'm giving you 30 days to remove all farm animals, dismantle or repaint your outbuildings to match HOA color standards, remove all visible farm equipment, and cease all commercial farming operations. Commercial farming operations. I felt heat rising in my chest. This farm has been feeding people since before North Carolina knew what a homeowners association was. My grandfather grew wheat that fed soldiers in World War I. My father grew tobacco and corn that went all across the state. I'm not stopping because some busybody with a clipboard says so. Patricia's face flushed red. If you don't comply, Mr. Calloway, we will take legal action. We will put a lien on this property and eventually we will foreclose. You'll lose everything. Get off my land, I said quietly. Excuse me, I said, get off my land, right now, before I call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing. She opened her mouth to say something else, then thought better of it. She turned on her heel, nearly twisting her ankle in the soft dirt, and marched back to her car. I watched her drive away, the dust settling behind her like fallout. My hands were shaking. I'd faced down droughts and floods, blight and hailstorms, but I'd never had anyone threaten to take my land before. I walked back to the farmhouse, my legs feeling heavier than they had that morning. The house was the same one my grandfather had built, though we'd added electricity and plumbing over the years. The original oak beams still held up the roof, and the fireplace was made from stones pulled from our own creek. I went to the study, a small room off the kitchen that had always been the farm's office, and opened the old iron safe that sat in the corner. The deed was right where it had always been, in a protective sleeve that kept the paper from yellowing too much. I pulled it out with careful hands and spread it on the desk. The language was old-fashioned, full of legal terms from another century, but the meaning was clear. This property, all 200 acres of it, belonged to the Calloway family, granted and guaranteed with all rights and privileges thereof. I read through the whole thing twice, looking for any loophole that might give credence to what Patricia Henderson had said. There was nothing. The property lines were clearly marked. The ownership was absolute. No mention of any homeowners association, because of course there wasn't. Such things didn't exist when this deed was written. My grandson Thomas stopped by that evening, like he usually did on Fridays after his shift at the power company. He was 32, built strong like his grandfather, with his grandmother's kind eyes. He'd grown up on this farm, spent his summers learning to work the land the way I had, the way my father had taught me. "Grandpa, you look troubled," he said, settling into the kitchen chair while I poured us both sweet tea. I told him about Patricia Henderson's visit, about the fines and threats, and her claim that my farm was now part of some HOA. Thomas's expression grew darker as I talked. "That's insane," he said when I finished. "They can't just declare your property part of their association." "That's not how property law works." "That's what I figured, but I don't know much about these things," I admitted. "When your grandmother was alive, she handled most of the paperwork and legal matters. I've just been keeping things running since she passed." Thomas pulled out his phone. "Let me call my friend Marcus. He's a lawyer in Charlotte. This is exactly the kind of thing he deals with." While Thomas made the call, I looked out the kitchen window at the land I'd worked my entire life. The sun was setting, painting the fields gold and orange. In the distance, I could see the new development Patricia had mentioned, rows of identical houses with tiny yards, all pressed together like they were afraid of space. When had that gone up? I'd noticed the construction over the past year, but I hadn't paid it much attention. People were always building something. Thomas hung up and turned to me. "Marcus says this happens more than you'd think. Developers buy up land around existing properties, create an HOA, and then try to claim the HOA boundaries include properties that never agreed to join. It's usually a pressure tactic to force people to sell. I'm not selling. I said firmly. I know, Grandpa, but Marcus says you need to take this seriously. He wants to meet with you tomorrow if you're free. He says if they've already filed liens or legal claims, you need to respond immediately. We set up the meeting for Saturday morning at 10. After Thomas left, I sat on the front porch in the rocking chair my father had made, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of my chickens settling in for the night. The air smelled like corn and earth and the creek that ran through the eastern section of the property. I'd been born in the bedroom upstairs. My father had been born in that same room, and his father before him. 3 generations of Calloways had lived and died on this land. We'd weathered the Depression, 2 world wars, countless recessions and booms. We'd adapted when tobacco became less profitable, switched to corn and soybeans. We'd survived droughts that killed crops and floods that washed away fences. We'd always found a way to keep going, but this felt different. This wasn't nature or economics or even bad luck. This was people with money and lawyers trying to take what wasn't theirs. Marcus Chen met us at a coffee shop in town the next morning. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. He'd brought a laptop and a legal pad, and he listened intently as I went through the whole story again. "You have the deed with you?" he asked. I pulled it out of the protective folder I'd brought. Marcus examined it carefully, taking photos with his phone and making notes. "This is solid," he said. "Really solid. The property is clearly deeded to your family with no encumbrances or restrictions, but let me look into the HOA's legal filing. They had to register with the county to create the association and establish boundaries. I need to see exactly what they claimed and whether they had any legal basis to include your property." "How long will that take?" Thomas asked. "A few days, maybe a week," Marcus said. "County records can be slow. But in the meantime, Mr. Calloway, don't sign anything they give you, don't pay any fines, and don't make any changes to your property. Keep running your farm exactly as you have been." "That's not a problem," I said. Marcus smiled. "I believe you. Look, I'll be honest with you. This kind of case can get expensive if it goes to court, but I think we've got a strong position here. Strong enough that once I file the appropriate responses and make it clear you're not backing down, they might drop the whole thing." "And if they don't?" I asked. His smile faded. "Then we fight. And it might cost you some money in legal fees, but it'll cost them a lot more. HOAs have money for lawyers, but they don't like spending it on cases they can't win. Bad for the budget, bad for the board's reputation with the homeowners." I hired Marcus on the spot. We shook hands, and he promised to file a formal response to any liens within 48 hours and to start investigating the HOA's legal standing. The following Tuesday, Patricia Henderson came back. This time she wasn't alone. She brought 2 other people with her, a thin man in his 50s who introduced himself as Richard Palmer, HOA treasurer, and a younger woman named Karen Williams, who apparently served as secretary. "Mr. Calloway," Patricia began, her tone suggesting she was trying to be patient with a difficult child, "we're here to make you a very generous offer. I was replacing boards on the chicken coop, and I didn't stop working. I'm listening. The HOA board has authorized me to offer you $250,000 for your property," she said. "That's well above market value for farmland in this area." I hammered in another nail. "Market value? You don't know what you're talking about, Miss Henderson. This land isn't just about market value." Richard Palmer stepped forward. "Mr. Calloway, be reasonable. You're an elderly man living alone on a huge property. That's 200 acres you're trying to maintain by yourself. Think about how much easier your life would be with $250,000 in the bank. You could buy a nice condo in town, live comfortably, not have to worry about all this upkeep. I like the upkeep, I said. It's called having a purpose. Karen Williams tried next, her voice syrupy sweet. We're just thinking of your welfare, Mr. Calloway. What happens if you get hurt out here? Who's going to help you? And all these fines are just piling up. We're up to $48,000 now. If you sell to us, we'll waive all the fines. You walk away clean with $250,000. I set down my hammer and finally looked at them. Let me make something clear to all three of you. This farm is not for sale. Not for $250,000, not for $1 million, not for any amount of money you could offer. This land has been in my family since 1892. My grandfather cleared it, planted it, built this house with his own hands. My father worked himself to the bone keeping it going through the Depression. I've spent my entire life here. I was born in that house, and God willing, I'll die in that house. So you can take your offer and your fines and your threats, and you can leave my property. Patricia's face turned red. You're making a mistake, Mr. Calloway. Those fines are legally binding. We have the authority to place a lien on this property, and if you don't pay, we can force a sale. My lawyer says different, I replied. In fact, my lawyer says you've got no legal standing at all to include this property in your HOA. That stopped them. Patricia glanced at Richard, who looked uncomfortable. You've retained a lawyer? Patricia asked. That's right. Marcus Chen out of Charlotte. He's real interested in your HOA and how you think you can just claim somebody's private property without their consent. Says there might be some legal issues with that. Richard cleared his throat. Mr. Calloway, I think there's been some miscommunication here. Perhaps if we all sat down with our respective legal counsel, we could work this out amicably. There's nothing to work out, I said. You all need to accept that this property is not and will never be part of your association. Now, for the second time, I'm asking you to leave my land. They left, but Patricia shot me a look that could have curdled milk. I watched them drive away, then went back to fixing the chicken coop. My hands were steadier this time. Having Marcus on my side made a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus filed formal objections to every fine the HOA had levied. He requested all documentation showing how they'd established their boundaries and what legal authority they claimed over my property. He sent letters to the HOA's lawyer making it clear that any attempt to place a lien would be met with immediate legal action. The HOA's response was to double down. They hired a private investigator who started photographing my property from the road. Every day, sometimes twice a day, a different car would stop on the public road and someone would take pictures. They photographed my chickens, my tractor, my barn, even the vegetables in my garden. They also started citing me for new violations. My mailbox was too close to the road. My driveway needed repaving. My fence posts were spaced incorrectly. The fines climbed to $60,000, then $70,000. Marcus filed a harassment complaint with the county. They're trying to overwhelm you with paperwork and legal fees, he explained during one of our phone calls. It's a tactic. They think if they make this expensive and annoying enough, you'll give up and sell. They don't know me very well, I said. I'm getting that impression, Marcus replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I've got some good news. I found the HOA's boundary filing with the county. They claimed a specific geographical area based on proximity to the development. The problem is, they can't just declare boundaries. They need either consent from the property owners, or they need to demonstrate that the properties were always intended to be part of the development. Your property clearly wasn't. So what does that mean? It means their boundaries are invalid, at least as they pertain to your land. I'm filing a motion to have their claims dismissed. But here's the thing, Mr. Calloway. They're not going to give up easy. This HOA has a lot of money behind it. The development company that built Meadowbrook Heights is still heavily involved, and they want your land. I think this whole HOA situation is just a smokescreen. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, I think the development company wants to expand. Your 200 acres is right in the middle of where they want to build. If they can get you out through the HOA, they can develop that land and make millions. So they're using the HOA as a legal weapon to force you out. That made an ugly kind of sense. I thought about those identical houses, all pressed together, and imagined them sprawling across my cornfields and pastures. The thought made me sick. Thomas came over that weekend and found me in the barn, sorting through old tools. He helped me organize, and we talked about the situation. "Grandpa, I want to help," he said. "I can contribute to the legal fees. I know Marcus isn't cheap." "You've got your own life, your own bills," I said. "This is my fight." "It's our family's farm," Thomas corrected. "This land is as much a part of my history as yours. I grew up here. My dad grew up here. If you think I'm going to stand by while some HOA tries to steal it, you don't know me very well." I felt something tight in my chest loosen a little. "Your grandmother would be proud of you. She'd be proud of you too," he said, "for standing up to these people." The next Monday, I got a notice that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for failure to pay fines and failure to comply with community standards. They were asking a judge to enforce the liens and authorize a foreclosure sale. Marcus called me as soon as he received the paperwork. "They're escalating. This is good, actually." "Good? How is this good?" "Because now we're in court and a judge is going to look at their claims. And when the judge sees that they have no legal authority over your property, this whole thing falls apart. But I need to warn you, this is going to take time. Court cases don't move fast. We're probably looking at several months, maybe longer." "I've got time," I said. "I'm not planning on going anywhere." The preliminary hearing was set for October, 2 months away. In the meantime, life on the farm continued. I planted winter wheat. I harvested the corn. I tended my chickens and fixed the things that needed fixing. The HOA continued their harassment, but I stopped paying attention to their letters and notices. Everything went straight to Marcus. What I didn't expect was for the situation to turn nasty. It started with my water. The farm had its own well, drilled deep into the aquifer that ran under this part of North Carolina. One morning in late September, I turned on the kitchen faucet and nothing came out. I checked the well house and found that someone had tampered with the pump. Wires had been cut deliberately and cleanly. I called the sheriff's office, and Deputy Frank Morrison came out to take a report. Frank was in his 40s, a good man who'd grown up in the area and knew the farm. "Mr. Calloway, this is vandalism," he said, examining the cut wires. "Any idea who might have done this?" "I've got some ideas," I said, and told him about the HOA situation. Frank's expression darkened. "That HOA has been causing problems all over the county. We've had complaints from several property owners near their development. But vandalism is a crime. I'll file a report, and if we can find any evidence linking this to specific individuals, we can press charges." I had the well pump repaired, which cost $800. 3 days later, someone cut through a section of my fence and my chickens got out. I spent half a day rounding them up. 2 of them had been killed by a fox or dog in the meantime. Then someone slashed the tires on my tractor. That was another $400. I installed security cameras around the property, motion-activated lights, and a better gate at the end of my driveway. Marcus advised me to document everything, every instance of vandalism, every cost. "If we can prove harassment, we can countersue," he said. The cameras caught someone the next time. It was late at night, around 2 in the morning when motion sensors lit up the barn area. The footage showed a figure in dark clothes trying to pry open the barn door. The person ran when the lights came on, but not before the camera got a decent shot of their face. Frank Morrison came out again the next morning to review the footage. "I know this guy," he said, pointing at the frozen image on my computer screen. "That's Derek Henderson. He's Patricia Henderson's son. He's been in trouble before, petty stuff mostly." "Can you arrest him?" I asked. "With this footage?" "Absolutely. That's attempted breaking and entering at minimum, plus we can connect him to the vandalism investigation." Frank arrested Derek Henderson that afternoon. Patricia showed up at my farm 6 hours later, and she was furious. "How dare you have my son arrested?" she screamed from behind my new gate. I'd locked it after the break-in attempt, and she couldn't get her car through. I walked down to the gate but didn't open it. "Your son was caught on camera trying to break into my barn. That's a crime, Miss Henderson. He wasn't doing any such thing. He was just checking on the property at 2 in the morning, in dark clothes, after cutting my fence and slashing my tires." Her face went pale. "Derek didn't do those things. You can't prove that. The sheriff seems to think otherwise. Now I suggest you leave before I call Deputy Morrison and have you cited for trespassing." She stood there shaking with rage for a moment, then got back in her car and drove away so fast she left rubber on my driveway. Derek Henderson was charged with attempted burglary and criminal mischief. He made bail within 24 hours, but the charges were serious. According to Marcus, who kept in touch with the prosecutor's office, Derek was looking at possible jail time if convicted. That seemed to finally get through to the HOA. The harassment stopped. No more vandalism, no more daily photographs, no more threatening letters. There was just silence for about 2 weeks. Then Marcus called me with news. "They want to settle." "Settle what?" I asked. "Everything. They want to drop the lawsuit, waive all fines, and formally exclude your property from the HOA boundaries. In exchange, you drop the harassment charges and agree not to sue them for damages." I thought about it. "What about Derek Henderson's criminal charges?" "Those are separate. That's a criminal matter, not civil. You can't drop those charges even if you wanted to. That's up to the district attorney." "And if I say no to settling?" Marcus paused. "Then we go to court in 3 weeks. And honestly, Mr. Calloway, I think we'll win. I think the judge will rule that the HOA never had any authority over your property and throw out all their claims. But litigation is expensive and it's stressful, and there's always some risk involved. A settlement gives you certainty. You get what you want: your land, free and clear, with no more HOA interference, without the cost and stress of a trial." "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "That's not my call to make. This is your land, your decision. But if you're asking my professional opinion, I'd say take the settlement. You've already won. They're admitting defeat. Make them put it in writing, get them out of your life, and go back to farming." I spent the rest of the day thinking about it. I walked my property line, all 200 acres of it, looking at the land my grandfather had claimed and my father had preserved, and I had worked my entire life. The corn had been harvested, and the fields were ready for winter wheat. The chickens were healthy and laying well. The barn and outbuildings were sound. This was Calloway land. It had always been Calloway land. And now, finally, these people were admitting they had no right to it. That evening, I called Marcus back. "I'll take the settlement, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "I want a formal written apology from the HOA board, acknowledging that they never had authority over my property and that their actions caused me significant harm and expense. I want them to pay for all my legal fees, all the repairs from the vandalism, and all the costs associated with defending against their harassment. And I want it in writing that they will never attempt to include my property in their association again. Not now. Not ever. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's going to be a harder sell. They're not going to want to pay for damages or admit wrongdoing. Then we go to trial, I said simply. Because I'm not letting them walk away from this like nothing happened. They tried to steal my land. They harassed me. They vandalized my property. They sent Patricia's son to break into my barn. I want them to pay for what they did. All right, Marcus said, and I could hear the approval in his voice. Let me see what I can do. The negotiations took another week. The HOA initially refused to pay anything or admit wrongdoing. Marcus countered by filing additional motions, including one seeking punitive damages for harassment, and another requesting that the court investigate the HOA's boundary claims for fraud. That changed their tune. Suddenly, they were much more willing to negotiate. The final settlement was hammered out in Marcus's office in Charlotte. I drove down with Thomas, and we sat across a conference table from Patricia Henderson, Richard Palmer, Karen Williams, and their lawyer, a slick-looking woman named Jennifer Brooks. Jennifer pushed the settlement agreement across the table. This represents a fair resolution for all parties, she said in a voice that suggested she thought she was doing me a favor. Marcus had already reviewed it, but I read through it carefully anyway. The HOA agreed to formally exclude my property from their boundaries, to drop all fines and liens, to pay my legal fees totaling $18,000, to pay for damages from vandalism totaling $2,300, and to issue a written statement acknowledging that they had no authority over my property. What about the apology? I asked. Jennifer's mouth tightened. We've included a statement acknowledging the boundary error. That's as far as my clients are willing to go. I looked at Patricia Henderson. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Not good enough, I said, pushing the agreement back. I want a real apology. I want acknowledgement that your HOA harassed me, vandalized my property, and attempted to force me off land that my family has owned for over 130 years. I want you to admit what you did was wrong. Mr. Calloway, Richard Palmer said, we're offering you everything you asked for. Don't be unreasonable. Unreasonable. I felt my temper rising. You people tried to steal my farm. You threatened me with foreclosure. You sent someone to vandalize my property and break into my barn. And I'm being unreasonable for wanting an apology. Jennifer started to say something, but Marcus cut her off. My client's request is simple and fair. A written apology acknowledging wrongdoing. If you're not willing to provide that, we'll see you in court. The HOA representatives huddled together, whispering. Finally, Patricia spoke up. Fine, we'll include an apology, but that's our final offer. Marcus drafted the language right there, and after more back and forth, everyone agreed. The final apology read, The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association acknowledges that it improperly attempted to include the property located at 1847 Rural Route 7, owned by Leonard Calloway, within its boundaries. The HOA had no legal authority over this property, and should never have issued violations, fines, or liens against Mr. Calloway. We apologize for the distress and expense our actions caused, and commit to never attempting to assert authority over this property in the future. I signed the settlement agreement. Patricia Henderson signed it with a hand that shook slightly. The other board members signed. The lawyers signed. And just like that, it was over. As we were leaving, Patricia stopped me in the hallway. You know you could have had $250,000, she said quietly. Instead you've got what? $20,000 in settlement money and a piece of paper saying we were wrong. Was it really worth it? I looked at her for a long moment. Miss Henderson, that land is worth more than money. It's worth more than your entire development. It's my family's legacy, my history, my home. You could never understand that because all you see is property values and profit margins. But yes, it was worth it. It was worth every penny, every sleepless night, every moment of stress. Because that land stays in my family where it belongs. She didn't have an answer for that. Thomas drove me home and we didn't talk much on the way. When we pulled up to the farmhouse, I sat in the truck for a minute, just looking at the place. "You did good, Grandpa," Thomas said. "We did good," I corrected. "Couldn't have done it without you and Marcus." That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I got up early like always and went out to feed the chickens. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the fields stretched out before me, ready for winter wheat. Derek Henderson's trial happened in November. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom while the prosecutor presented evidence of the vandalism. The security camera footage was damning, and Derek's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Derek pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and attempted burglary. The judge sentenced him to 6 months in county jail, suspended to probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution for the damages. Patricia Henderson sat in the courtroom during the sentencing, her face pale and drawn. When Derek was led out in handcuffs to be processed for probation, she finally broke down and cried. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. After the trial, I ran into Frank Morrison outside the courthouse. "Justice served," he said, shaking my hand. "Something like that," I agreed. "You know, Mr. Calloway, I've been a deputy for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people get pushed around by corporations and organizations with money and lawyers. It's nice to see somebody fight back and win." "I had good help," I said. "You had a good case," Frank corrected. "And the backbone to see it through. That matters." Winter came to Calloway Farm the way it always did, with frost on the fields and ice on the pond. I spent my days doing the indoor work that winter required, maintaining equipment, planning for spring planting, keeping the chickens warm. Thomas came by regularly, often bringing his girlfriend Laura, who was a teacher in town. She was a sweet girl with a good head on her shoulders, and I could tell Thomas was serious about her. They'd walk the property with me, and I'd tell them stories about my grandfather and father, about the history of the land. "Would you ever want to farm?" I asked Thomas one day. We were in the barn organizing tools. He was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about it. I love this place, Grandpa. I love the history, the connection to the land. But I also love my job at the power company. I don't know if I could give that up." "You don't have to," I said. "This land has always adapted to the times. Your great-grandfather grew tobacco. Your grandfather grew wheat and corn. I've done a bit of everything. There's no rule that says you have to farm it full-time. You could lease some of it, farm part of it yourself, keep some of it wild. The important thing is keeping it in the family." "I'd like that," Thomas said. "When the time comes, I mean, I'd like to keep this place going." "Good," I said, "because I've been updating my will. When I'm gone, this all goes to you. All 200 acres, the house, the buildings, everything. It'll be your responsibility to pass it down to your children someday." Thomas's eyes got a little wet. "I won't let you down, Grandpa. I know you won't." Christmas came, and Thomas and Laura joined me for dinner. We ate ham from a hog that old Pete Morrison had raised, vegetables from my garden that I'd canned in the fall, and sweet potato pie made from Laura's grandmother's recipe. We sat around the table in the house my grandfather had built, and for a few hours, everything felt right with the world. Marcus Chen sent me a card with a note inside. "Congratulations on your victory. It was an honor representing you and fighting for what was right. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." I sent him back a basket of preserves and a thank you note. In January, I received a letter from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. My first instinct was to throw it away, but something made me open it. Inside was a notice that Patricia Henderson had resigned as president. The new president, someone named Michael Torres, had written a personal note. Dear Mr. Calloway, I wanted to introduce myself as the new HOA president and assure you that the association has no intention of bothering you or your property ever again. The previous board's actions were inappropriate and won't be repeated. I hope we can be good neighbors going forward. Sincerely, Michael Torres. I appreciated the gesture, even if it was probably motivated more by fear of lawsuits than genuine goodwill. I wrote back a brief note saying I had no issues with being neighborly as long as everyone respected property boundaries. Spring came early that year. By March, I was out plowing fields and preparing for planting. The winter wheat looked good, green and healthy, and I was optimistic about the season ahead. One warm afternoon in April, I was working on the tractor when a car pulled up the driveway. I tensed for a moment, old instincts from the HOA battle kicking in, but relaxed when I saw it was just a young couple, probably in their 30s. The man approached cautiously. Mr. Calloway, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is David Martinez and this is my wife Ellen. We just bought a house in Meadowbrook Heights and we heard about what happened with the HOA last year. Word gets around, I said, wiping grease from my hands. We wanted to apologize, Ellen said. When we bought our house, we had no idea about any of that. We're horrified by how the previous board treated you. That wasn't your doing, I said. No need to apologize. We also wanted to ask if you ever sell eggs, David said. We'd love to buy fresh eggs from a local farm instead of the grocery store. I smiled. I've got more eggs than I know what to do with. Come by any time. $3 a dozen. They became regular customers, stopping by every week or two for eggs. Through them, I met other families from the development, people who were genuinely good folks just trying to raise their kids and live their lives. Not everyone in Meadowbrook Heights had been part of the problem, I realized. Most of them probably hadn't even known what the HOA board was doing. More customers started coming by. Word spread that there was a farm selling fresh eggs, and soon I was going through 3 dozen eggs a week, then 4, then 5. It was nice having people around again, even if just for a few minutes at a time. Thomas suggested I expand. You could do farm tours for kids, Grandpa. School groups would love it. Or you could sell more produce, maybe raise a few more chickens. I'm 87 years old, I reminded him. I'm not looking to expand my operation, but the idea stuck with me. Not the expansion part, but the idea of sharing the farm with people who wanted to understand where their food came from, who wanted to connect with the land. In May, I invited a local elementary school to bring their second-grade class out for a field trip. 25 kids descended on Calloway Farm with their teachers, and I showed them the chickens, let them collect eggs, walked them through the fields and explained how corn grew. They were fascinated by everything, asking a million questions, and I realized how much I'd missed having young people around. One little girl with pigtails asked me, "How long have you lived here?" "My whole life," I told her. "I was born in that house right there, 87 years ago." Her eyes went wide. "That's like 100 years. Not quite," I said with a laugh, "but close enough." After that, I hosted a school group every few weeks during the spring and early summer. The teachers loved it because it was hands-on education. The kids loved it because they got to see real farm animals and get their hands dirty. And I loved it because it reminded me why this land mattered, why it was worth fighting for. By the time summer rolled around fully, life had settled into a new rhythm. The corn was growing tall, the chickens were laying well, and I had a steady stream of customers for eggs and occasional produce. Thomas came by at least twice a week, often with Laura, and I could tell they were getting serious about their future together. One evening in July, Thomas showed up alone. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his car keys. "What's on your mind, boy?" I asked. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I'm going to ask Laura to marry me. I wanted to show you first, get your blessing." I felt a lump in my throat. "Your grandmother would have loved her. I love her too. You have my blessing, Thomas. You've had it since the day you brought her here." He proposed the next weekend during a walk around the farm. She said yes, of course. They came to tell me together, both of them glowing with happiness, and we celebrated with sweet tea on the porch. "We want to get married here," Laura said. "On the farm, if that's all right with you." "I can't think of anything I'd like more," I said honestly. They set the date for the following May, giving them almost a year to plan. Laura's mother got involved in the planning, and suddenly the farmhouse was full of wedding talk, fabric samples, and menu options. I mostly stayed out of it, but I made sure the property was in the best shape it had been in years. I repainted the barn, fixed every fence post, cleared brush from around the house, and planted wildflowers in areas that would bloom in the spring. Fall came and went. I harvested the corn, planted winter wheat again, and prepared for another Carolina winter. Derek Henderson finished his community service and disappeared from the area, I heard through the grapevine. Patricia Henderson was rarely seen around Meadowbrook Heights anymore. Richard Palmer had also left the HOA board, and the new leadership seemed focused on actually serving the homeowners rather than expanding their little empire. Winter was mild, which was good for an old man's bones. I spent the cold months working on indoor projects, building Laura and Thomas a hope chest from oak that had come from our own land. I carved their initials and wedding date into the lid, along with the Calloway family crest that my grandfather had designed, a simple shield with a wheat stalk and plow. Spring arrived with a burst of color. The wildflowers I'd planted bloomed right on schedule, and the farm looked like something from a painting. Laura's mother came out a month before the wedding to see the property and plan the setup. She fell in love with it immediately. "This is going to be the most beautiful wedding," she said, clasping her hands together. "Look at this place, Leonard. It's absolutely perfect." The week before the wedding, families started arriving from all over. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, old friends, Thomas's father, who I'd always gotten along with despite his divorce from my daughter. The farmhouse couldn't hold everyone, so people got hotels in town, but they all gathered at the farm during the day. The wedding day was perfect. May sunshine, clear blue skies, temperature in the mid-70s. We set up chairs in the field closest to the house, arranged in rows with an aisle down the middle. Thomas and Laura exchanged vows under an arch. Thomas had built himself from branches cut from our land, decorated with flowers from Laura's mother's garden. I walked Laura down the aisle since her father had passed away years before. She was beautiful in her simple white dress, and Thomas looked happier than I'd ever seen him. When the preacher pronounced them married and they kissed, I had to wipe my eyes. The reception was held in the barn, which we'd cleaned and decorated with lights and flowers. There was dancing and food and laughter, and for one perfect evening, Calloway Farm was alive with celebration the way it used to be when my grandfather would throw harvest parties. Late in the evening, Thomas found me sitting on the porch, taking a break from the festivities. "You all right, Grandpa?" he asked, sitting down beside me. "I'm perfect," I said. "This has been one of the best days of my life." "Laura and I have been talking," Thomas said. "About the future, about the farm. We want to build a house here if that's all right with you. Not right away, but eventually. We want to raise our kids here, the way I was raised, the way you were raised." I looked at my grandson, this good man who understood the value of legacy and land and family. "I think that's a fine idea. There's plenty of room. We could put a house over by the east pasture near the creek. Beautiful spot." "That's exactly where we were thinking," Thomas said with a smile. We sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the music and laughter from the barn, watching the stars come out over fields that had been worked by Calloway hands for more than a century. The following months were a blur of happiness. Thomas and Laura started making plans for their house. I helped Thomas mark out the property lines, showed him where the good building sites were, told him about the land and water and earth. Laura was pregnant by August, and the news filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in years. My first great-grandchild, another generation of Calloways who would grow up knowing this land. I turned 88 in September, and Thomas and Laura threw me a birthday party on the farm. People came from all over, former customers, neighbors, friends from church, even some of the families from Meadowbrook Heights who'd become regulars at my egg stand. As I looked around at all these people gathered on my land, celebrating with me, I thought about Patricia Henderson and her threats, her fines, her attempts to force me off this property. She'd seen 200 acres and thought about profit margins and development opportunities. She'd never understood that some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. This land was more than property. It was history and heritage, sweat and sacrifice, love and loss. It was my grandfather clearing stumps with his bare hands, my father plowing through the Depression, my grandmother canning vegetables to feed the family through hard winters. It was every sunrise I'd watched from the porch, every harvest I'd brought in, every storm I'd weathered. It was Calloway land, and it always would be. Thomas and Laura's daughter was born on a cold February morning. They named her Rose Ellen Calloway, and when Thomas brought her to the farm for the first time, wrapped in a pink blanket, I held her and felt the weight of the future in my arms. "Welcome home, little Rose," I whispered to her. "This is your land too. This is your heritage." Construction on Thomas and Laura's house started that spring. I was too old to help with the actual building, but I supervised, offered advice, and brought lunch out to the workers. The house went up quickly, a modest 3-bedroom with a big porch overlooking the creek. It was ready by summer, and they moved in with baby Rose. For the first time in years, there was a young family on Calloway Farm. I'd wake up in the morning and see lights on in Thomas's house, see him leaving for work, see Laura hanging laundry on the line with Rose in a carrier on her back. The farm felt alive again. I was 89 when my health started declining. Nothing dramatic, just the slow shutdown that comes with age. My doctor said I had a strong heart for a man my age, but my body was tired. I started spending more time in the house, less time in the fields. Thomas took over most of the farm work, doing it before and after his shifts at the power company. "You don't have to do this," I told him one evening. We were sitting on my porch, watching Rose toddle around the yard. "Yes, I do," Thomas said simply. "This is my responsibility now, Grandpa. You built this up, kept it going all these years. Let me carry some of the weight." I didn't argue. The truth was I was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. That fall, Marcus Chen came to visit. He'd heard through the legal grapevine that I wasn't doing well and wanted to make sure my affairs were in order. We sat in the study, the same room where I'd pulled out the original deed all those years ago, and reviewed everything. "Your will is solid," Marcus said. "Thomas inherits everything, clean and clear. I've also included provisions that the land can't be sold or developed for 3 generations without unanimous consent of all Calloway heirs. That should protect it from exactly what the HOA tried to do. 3 generations, I repeated. That'll take us to what, 2100, roughly, Marcus said. By then, who knows what the world will look like, but for now your family land is protected. We shook hands and I thanked him again for everything he'd done. You saved my farm, I told him. You saved your farm, he corrected. I just helped you do the paperwork. The courage, the determination, the willingness to fight, that was all you. Winter came again, my 90th winter on Calloway Farm. I spent most of my time in the house now, sitting in the chair by the window where I could watch the fields. Thomas brought Rose over every day, and she'd climb into my lap and I'd read to her or tell her stories about her great-great-grandfather who'd built this place. Tell me about the bad people who tried to take the farm, she'd say. She was 3 now, old enough to understand stories, young enough to see the world in simple terms of good and bad. They weren't all bad, I'd tell her. They were just confused. They thought money and rules were more important than family and history, but we showed them different, didn't we? We showed them, she'd agree seriously. On a cold morning in January, I woke up and knew it was my last day. I don't know how I knew, I just did. There was a clarity to everything, a sense of completion. Thomas came over for breakfast like he always did, bringing Rose with him. Take me out to the fields, I said after we'd eaten. Thomas looked worried. Grandpa, it's cold out there. You should stay inside where it's warm. I've been warm for 90 years, I said. I want to see my land one more time. He helped me into my coat and boots, and we walked slowly out to the fields. The winter wheat was coming up green, and I could see all the way to the property line where Meadowbrook Heights began. But the houses seemed small and distant, insignificant compared to the sweep of the land. I'm proud of you, Thomas, I said. You're going to take good care of this place. I will, he promised. I'll make sure Rose knows the stories, knows the history, and when she's old enough, I'll teach her to work the land the way you taught me. We stood there together, 3 generations of Calloways in the cold morning air, looking at land that had been in our family for over 130 years. This is Calloway land, I said. Remember that. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to take it or change it or develop it. This is Calloway land. I'll remember, Grandpa. I died that night, peacefully in my sleep in the house where I'd been born 90 years before. Thomas found me in the morning, and he said later that I had a smile on my face. The funeral was held on the farm, of course. They buried me in the family cemetery up on the hill, next to my wife and my parents and my grandparents. From that spot, you can see the whole property, all 200 acres stretching out in every direction. Thomas gave the eulogy, and he told the story of the HOA battle, of how a stubborn old farmer had stood up to threats and intimidation and refused to give up his family's land. People laughed and cried, and afterward, dozens of them came up to Thomas to tell him how much the story had meant to them. Your grandfather inspired a lot of people, one man said. He showed us that you don't have to roll over when someone with money and lawyers tries to push you around. You can fight back. You can win. Years later, Thomas would tell that story to his children, and they would tell it to theirs. The story of Leonard Calloway, who stood up to the HOA and won, who protected his family's land against people who saw only dollar signs and development opportunities. The deed still sits in the safe in the farmhouse, the same safe where I kept it all those years. The words haven't changed, and the meaning is still clear. This land belongs to the Calloway family, granted and guaranteed, with all rights and privileges thereof. And no HOA, no development company, no amount of money or threats or legal maneuvering could ever change that simple truth. Calloway land stays with Calloways. That's the way it was, the way it is, and the way it will be for generations to come. Because some things are worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth preserving. Family, history, heritage, home. Thomas still farms the land, working it before and after his shifts at the power company. Laura runs a small farm stand on weekends selling eggs and vegetables. Rose is 7 now, old enough to help feed the chickens and collect eggs, learning the same lessons I learned at her age. The HOA at Meadowbrook Heights keeps to itself these days. The development has grown, more houses added, more families moving in. But they've learned to respect the boundary between their manicured lawns and the farm that refuses to disappear. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Thomas sits on the porch of the farmhouse with Laura and Rose, watching the sunset paint the fields gold and orange. And he tells Rose stories about her great-grandfather, about the man who refused to give up, who stood firm when others would have folded, who understood that some things matter more than money. He loved this land, Thomas always says, and he made sure it would stay in our family forever. Rose listens with wide eyes, taking it all in, learning what it means to be a Calloway. Learning that land isn't just dirt and crops, but legacy and responsibility. Learning that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when people with power and money tell you you're wrong. The farm continues, season after season, year after year. The corn grows tall in summer, the wheat greens in winter, the chickens lay eggs, and Calloways work the land their ancestors claimed over a century ago. And somewhere, I like to think I'm watching over it all, making sure the legacy continues, making sure my family remembers what I fought for and why it mattered. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not defeating the HOA, not winning in court, not even keeping the land itself. It was about preserving something precious for the people who come after, making sure they have roots and history and a place to call home. That's what Calloway Farm represents, and that's what it will always represent, as long as there are Calloways to tend it and protect it and love it the way I did. The deed said it all, in words written over 100 years ago but still true today. This land belongs to the Calloway family, granted and guaranteed with all rights and privileges thereof. Forever and always, Calloway land.